All right, let's talk about the brain for a little bit. We have one brain, but we have in a way three different parts of our brain, three logical sections of our brain that roughly go up the evolutionary ladder. And it starts with the reptilian complex that's made up of the brainstem and the amygdala. Any guesses why they call it the brain or the reptilian complex or the reptile brain?
Because it's primal.
It's primal, and because reptiles have them. Those clever scientists with their names, reptile complex. So I've got three little boys. They like running and chasing lizards in the desert. Lizards don't do much. Reptiles don't do much. They have strong fight, flight, or freeze response, and they go around trying to eat, and there's not a whole lot more to them. Mostly survival instinct is their part of the brain. We have that same part of the brain in our heads that has the same job. It's going to try to keep us safe. If we were in a jungle years ago and a man-eating tiger was chasing us, that part of the brain is going to kick in automatically to put us in fight or flight and try to keep us safe. It's our best friend when it's working with us. It's probably our worst enemy when it starts to work against us. So, for example, most of us are afraid or nervous in job interviews or speaking in public. Our reptile brain is thinking that interviewer across the table is a man-eating tiger. The more evolved neocortex up here, which we'll talk about in a minute, is like, nah, they're not a man-eating tiger. They're just another interviewer. They're just a person. No, I'm pretty sure they're a tiger. They want to eat me, especially the guy then across the table is going like this. Okay. Trying to eat me. That's its job. Keep me safe. Go up a little bit to the limbic system or the mammalian brain. That's what we have in common with mammals. That's where you start having some of the higher level emotions and feelings and bonding. And so dogs and cats, they have this part of their brain, and that's why they're more likely to cuddle with you than your lizard or snake, because of that part of their brain. Then you go up to the neocortex, and that's the logical part of your brain, the part of the brain that can look into the future and plan. It has values. It cares about things. And that's the part. Which part of the brain do you think you want to have in charge when you're in an interview? Especially if it's a technical interview, they're going to have you going up there on the whiteboard. Your reptile brain's going to be like, uh-oh, I'm going to screw it up. They're going to eat me.
And then they'll eat me.
They're going to eat me. The logical brain, the tactical brain is the one that you want to have engaged so that you can perform at your best. And what? Yes?
I've always been told, because I take presentation classes, that there's some real positive part about being nervous and that you can actually use that in your favor. Could you say that the reptile complex helps in that aspect? Because it does, you can push your nervous side to a positive.
Totally.
Energetic. Okay.
And I love that you said that. We're going to put a pin in it, just like in Bolt, because in one of our slides we talked about that.
We are going to talk about that.
Spoiler alert: stress is only bad if you think that if it's bad. But we're gonna get to that as part of our overall strategy. But I wanted to give you this overview to understand that marketers understand this principle. What part of our brains is usually making a purchasing decision? Think of Black Friday. We'd like to think we're making logical choices with our prefrontal cortex when we're buying things on Black Friday, but more often than not, it's our primitive emotional side of our brain that's making the decisions. That's why they have the adage in sales that we buy on emotion and then we justify our decision with logic and data. Now, I'm in the data industry. I've been in data analytics for over 10 years, and we especially like to think that we're objective and logical, and we make data-driven decisions. But even in the data world, at their conferences, they're starting to recognize that data by itself isn't enough, that you have to incorporate stories and you have to incorporate emotion if you want to be influential with your data. Okay? So the reptile brain, in particular the amygdala, it's a little part in the middle of the brain, acts kind of like a meerkat. Have you ever seen the meerkats at the zoo? Or they stand up and they're out looking over their fake Serengeti at the zoo. And sometimes they'll have a sentry meerkat that's just always looking out for tigers. And if it sees a tiger, then it's going to squeak, or whatever it is meerkats do. I don't know what actually they do. I don't know what foxes say either, but it makes some kind of a sound. But it's going to alert all the other meerkats, and they're going to dive down in their hole. That's what our amygdala is like. It's like our own inner meerkat that's always scanning the environment for danger and trying to alert us if it sees something it doesn't like. So that part of the brain with the amygdala and the limbic system, it doesn't have a great reputation. Happiness psychologist Sean Achor, he refers to that part of the brain as the jerk, because so often it's working against our goals, not with our goals. I've heard Dr. Daniel Amen refer to it as a spoiled inner child that wants what it wants and it wants it right now. It's the impulsive, emotional side of the brain. Whereas the prefrontal cortex is the happy and logical part of the brain that is going to make probably the best decision. It's going to make a calculated decision. I don't know about you, but that's the part that I want to have running the show when I'm going into my job interviews. But the problem is there's this struggle for power between the two parts of the brain. So when we have lots of activity in the prefrontal cortex, there tends to be less in the limbic system and the brainstem. This is when things are going awesome for us. When we're happy, we're productive, things are going well. But when something goes wrong, that balance of power starts to shift, and the limbic system and the brainstem start to take over. Then there's less activity in your prefrontal cortex. And if it gets bad enough, your prefrontal cortex is dormant completely. And we've all been there at times in our lives where it's probably the most obvious is if you see two people arguing. If you see someone arguing, it's easy from the outside to see how irrational they've become. But do they see it in the moment? You watch two people bumping heads, and they quickly throw logic out the window and care only about being right, not about, they want to win the fight, not actually get to the truth or find out what's actually right. Okay? That's a perfect example of this shift. As a side note, that's also what happens with addictions and bad habits. When the limbic system takes over, we're in a state where it's similar to being drugged, and you're not making logical decisions anymore. What's interesting, too, is that in youth, the prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until closer to the age of 20, which might explain some teenagers' behavior when they act impulsively without thinking first. Okay? So struggle for power. And this is going to apply when we do talk about anxiety in job interviews, but it applies to how are we going to build out a network and get people to refer us to the position. We want to be able to speak to their gut, to their emotional side of the brain, and get them to trust us and like us, and to see us as an authority in our space. This is actually a slide from a data analytics conference. So again, we're in the data world thinking that objective key performance indicators are what drive decisions. But they found that decision makers will still go with their gut over the data about 90% of the time. Does that bug anybody? Mm-hmm. It bugs me because I'm a data guy. But that's the reality of it. What's funny is I show this statistic, this number, to data people, and a lot of them resist it, not recognizing the irony that they were just given data and their gut disagreed with it. Okay. So the gut, if we're making so much decisions on the gut, that doesn't mean you throw the data out. And when it comes to job seeking, qualifications do still matter. That's another key thing here. We can't go into a developer position without knowing any coding at all. But if we can have those qualifications, the base qualifications, and be awesome, and be able to address the gut, that makes us stand out from the competition and will get us more opportunities.
Do you mind if I define the gut a little bit?
You
I
bet.
think the gut is our friends. Yeah, thanks.
That's why I'm buttoning my jacket here, because of my gut.
It's our friends and it's our own experience, and sometimes, in the face of data, we want to say, well, I had a different experience than
Yeah.
what this data says, and maybe, I don't know, I'm brainstorming what gut is.
For this context, gut's going to be your emotional side. When we say we're making a gut decision, that's what we're talking about. That indefinable something.
The feeling about
feeling
that
of it.
decision.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
So.
That actually has a neuroscience root to it. We see this a lot in body language. Somebody will just have a gut feeling about somebody. I just don't like this person, but I don't know what it is. There's probably a nonverbal reason. Their subconscious is picking up on these nonverbal cues and is making a decision about the person, which we're going to see when we talk about the first impressions too, how much power the body language has over our interactions. So I started realizing this going back to my career track. I did get the job doing tech support. Didn't know what I was doing for the longest time. But eventually I learned it. And for a time at that company, I ended up working on a team that was coaching the tech support agents. So if you've ever called into one of those and it says this call may be monitored for quality assurance, I was one of those creepy guys listening on the phone call. And then I'd provide coaching, technical and soft skills training to the agents. And over time, I found that the agents we had a whole team of us doing it, but they were requesting that I would come and do the coaching for them. And it worried me at first. I thought, I'm probably being too friendly. I'm probably being too chummy. I probably need to be stricter. But I went back and looked at the data. I looked at all the different scores that I was giving versus the other coaches, and I was on average scoring lower. I was being more strict on the scores than everybody else, but for some reason they wanted me to still rate them. That was a great example of the gut over the data. If it was purely objective, if they were just driven by numbers for their career, then they would have wanted somebody else to do it, but there was that gut feel where they wanted me to do the coaching for them. I wanted to test this. Has anyone heard the cookie experiment yet? Some of you probably have. Mitch helped with it.